Well, the release of hundreds of pages of court documents detailing dozens of former associates of financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein on Wednesday. They started on Wednesday, Thursday, and then yesterday we had another drop of names. It's unlikely, apparently, to make any difference, or will it? The papers come from a lawsuit, from one of Epstein's alleged victims, against his girlfriend and collaborator Ghislaine Maxwell, British socialite. That was in December 2021. She was convicted of helping Epstein groom victims for sexual abuse, later sentenced to 20 years in prison. Of course, Epstein was found in his cell, hanged in August 2019 while awaiting trial for those alleged sex trafficking of minors. The medical examiner concluded the death was a suicide. There's conspiracy theories around that. But it's the names of celebrities that have been dropped into all of this that are making headlines. Of course, first and foremost would be Prince Andrew. Apparently, in the latest crop of revelations, it's alleged, or they say from the papers, that he had dozens of massages when he stayed in, his Epstein's Palm Beach lair. The Duke had daily massages and stayed in the Bloom Room, according to a former housekeeper in these unsealed files. Some of the names: Kate Blanchett, Naomi Campbell, David Copperfield, Cameron Diaz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Stephen Hawking, Michael Jackson, Kevin Spacey, and Bruce Willis. Now, many of these people were name dropped by either Epstein or people around him, so they weren't actually involved, and they weren't involved, I have to say, in any wrongdoing. They're just names that came up. Joseph, so let's talk about the legal implications. I mean, one commentator said nothing is likely to change. But what about for the UK? Because already we've got, Keir Starmer, I think, has already asked that the Met look into, again, the allegations against Prince Andrew, which we have to say he denies. Can anything be done? Or is it pretty much dead in the water?
Okay. Well, good evening, as always, Trisha. I think, first of all, there are kind of the legal considerations, PR considerations, and practical situations. Bizarrely, on Joseph's judgments, I think we're also probably going to be talking about the geopolitical implications, because there's been something about this that hasn't looked right from the beginning. I'm not going to say on live television, Epstein didn't kill himself. Oh, I just did. But the, I'm not,
really? Are you part? Hang on. Are you part of that? Are you part of those? Are you one of those people who's has some question marks over?
Listen, it's our job to be questioning as citizens, and it's certainly my job to be questioning as a lawyer. However, you and I, we operate on the basis of evidence, at least for this half hour on a Saturday, don't we? And the reality is that even if things don't make sense, you can't necessarily jump to conclusions. It's not what I'm paid to do in my professional life. And, I'm certainly not going to do it here. But with regard to these documents, first of all, okay, so what are we looking at, I think, is the first question. How does it arise that it comes into us, and is it anything new? Well, they're documents that were served pre-trial in a now settled defamation lawsuit brought by Virginia Guiffre against Ghislaine Maxwell, who was saying that she was crackers, that none of this happened. Of course, it was probably wise, as Mrs. Maxwell was anticipating her criminal trial, that she put this to bed and settled it, because, of course, once this stuff was out in the open before her criminal case, well, one can imagine that it might have provided difficulties in the PR battle she was trying to run unsuccessfully before her conviction. Do you remember her brothers coming on?
I remember her whole family turning up in court day after day.
They threw the kitchen sink at it, and it wasn't enough because she's a sex trafficker. Anyway, that case she settled reportedly for millions, although it was settled under seal. That means, Trisha, secretly. But applications, that was, quite a long time ago, nearly 10 years ago, but applications have been made since for those documents to be unsealed. Of course, Ghislaine Maxwell is now convicted. One can see that there might be a public interest to that information being known, and there have been various wranglings. What has happened is in 3 tranches and more tranches, more bundles of documents to be released, as they are redacted if necessary to protect victims, we should say survivors of abuse, etc. And also so that people who are named in them, if they think, well, I really shouldn't be named, it's not fair, it's prejudicial to me, I haven't done anything wrong, those people can appeal. So that's why we're waiting for these final dribs and drabs to come out. But in those 3 tranches of documents, those 3 bundles of documents, what we're getting is essentially the different documents that are served before a libel trial, witness statements, deposition transcripts. Depositions are a kind of dummy run cross-examination, very popular in American civil proceedings, Trisha, which
but
narrowed...
Joseph, let me ask you this.
Please.
Is it fair? Is it fair? Because all of these names like Kate Blanchett, Naomi Campbell, David Copperfield, the list goes on. When you actually read through, they were name dropped. Like,
absolutely.
Jeffrey said he was on the phone to what have you. Stephen Hawking, yes, there are actually pictures of him on the island, and Michael Jackson and what have you. But still, was there any wrongdoing? I mean, it's different levels from somebody mentioning your name to actually visiting the island. But the reputational damage is probably much of a muchness.
I think that's right. And I think that we should be very careful about assuming somebody who's on some theoretical list. The only is therefore tainted or implicated. Trisha, there is no real list in this. And it's been fated and kind of promoted around the media in the past few days as, the Epstein list or whatever. That's just simply not the case. There is a single list, which is a list of witnesses, but those witnesses are witnesses who are not only ones that the Guiffre team wanted to cross-examine, but ones they wanted to rely on as helpful, and some who might just have things that are interesting to say. Some of the people, like, for example, David Copperfield, the magician, the illusionist, whatever you call him, some of those people, they're mentioned in passing, a hearsay, by alleged survivors, not as perpetrators, but as somebody who may be able to corroborate part of what was going on, even if they weren't party to it. Or even in Mr. Copperfield's situation, they didn't appear to know what was going on, only that there was some element of recruitment, not necessarily that it was sexual or harmful. I think it's very important that we make these distinctions. Prince Andrew is mentioned, but he hasn't had a right to reply. These are not proceedings against him. These are proceedings that settled with Ghislaine Maxwell, who he admits knowing. I think there's photographs of them together. But this is not the same as somebody having gone through a legal process. Alan Dershowitz, one of the legal stars of the last 100 years. He's appeared recently on TalkTV, I think, with Douglas Murray, and it made it very, very clear that, anybody who reads in, and also on his own YouTube channel, I think, he said anyone who reads into this, any implication of guilt, is running a dangerous game. And I tell you what, looking at what Alan Dershowitz did to Guiffre, fighting her in her proceedings, she decided to backtrack on those proceedings. She decided she couldn't remember, no doubt assisted by the fact that the proceedings, those other proceedings against Dershowitz, were being so effectively fought by him. He even managed to get her own lawyer disqualified from acting in her case, in her defense. You take on somebody of that legal might and political power, with unless you have serious evidence, at your peril. I think that we do, however, discover some very interesting things in a broad sense from these documents, and this is where I think looking at the organization, the odious calculation and efficacy of this very well-funded, Trisha, abuse ring. I
was going to say, when you talk about well-funded, what was that case that just came out? I was, hang on, who just got a whole load of money. Oh, Victoria's Secret mogul, Les Wexner. When you look at the money that he threw, Epstein donated $47 million to a charity founded by Wexner. $47 million. I mean, the money that this case involves is
it's mad. And the reason it's mad is, that I've acted in some of the most serious sexual offences cases. We've talked about it before, the Rotherham abuse scandal. These cases are not characterised by being well funded. They're characterised by, for want of a better word, odious perverts gathering together and abusing the vulnerable. This does not look consistent with just pervert billionaires getting their kicks from abusing young ladies. There's too much money being spent shipping these people around the world. There's no obvious money trail coming back from the people going to the Lolita Express. It looks, and we're straying into speculation, but it makes sense to me more as somebody who has experience in these types of cases and in international fraud cases, as something that's more consistent with an operation that Epstein and Maxwell, in fact, were running on behalf of somebody else. The words like compromat have been used recently. I saw on a TalkTV analysis of this. Trisha,
So you think there's a possibility, and we are only speculating here, that we're dealing with the monkeys and not the organ grinder? Is that kind of what could be speculated?
Well, I mean, looking at Prince Andrew, for example, there's no question, if you look at the relationship with Epstein, that in that relationship, he was targeted by a sophisticated man. Now, irrespective of what you think of any of these people who fell into the path of Epstein, he was a cool political operator. It's clear that he was in close business commercially with Les Wexner, who you mentioned. It's, I think, accepted that he made hundreds of millions out of that relationship. I think Eric Weinstein, the political commentator and YouTuber in the US, who recently appeared alongside Dershowitz, in fact, on that Douglas Murray spot on TalkTV, said he once met Epstein, and he said, none of what he said to me was consistent with him knowing anything about finance. It just didn't make sense. I don't know what was going on. I don't presume to know what's going on. All I do know is that Epstein's dead. Maxwell's in prison. Epstein's right-hand man died in prison before trial, Brunel, over in France. And this is a hell of a lot of money to invest in something that is simply about rich people being perverts. It doesn't make sense to this lawyer. I don't think we will ever know what really happened, but I think the way in which this abuse ring was allowed to take place, that it continued after it was exposed, after criminal proceedings had made findings, and nobody seems to do anything. This is about the victims, the survivors. This is about the people who came through this. This is about something like this never being able to happen again. If it was state-backed, shame on those people. But as citizens, we should have our eyes very wide open, shouldn't we?
I was going to say, because money buys. It corrupts. It absolutely corrupts. And every time you think it could never happen again in this day and age, because we've got cameras everywhere, everybody's filming everything online, everybody knows, and yet it does happen again, because the bottom line is when there's a lot of money, people will become blind, deaf and dumb. So just to finish up, if you had a client whose name came out on here and saying, Naomi or somebody else like that, can anybody whose name comes out on this, who feels that they will suffer reputational damage, and I know we've touched upon Kevin Spacey in the past, and here his name is again, just really briefly, because we're about to finish, can they do anything about it legally?
Well,
they can't. It doesn't matter, does it?
In the US, your constitutional right to free speech is very jealously preserved. In a way that it actually isn't so much in the UK. There's a reason that people sue for libel, Americans sue for libel in the UK, and that's because we are more careful about protecting the reputation of people without proof of a decision of a court of law than, for example, in the US. I am unsurprised that these people's names have been released, even though it does cause them prejudice. It causes, for example, someone like David Copperfield, who, from what I can see, has done nothing wrong. The fact that his name is being mentioned and associated with all of this, I don't think there's any evidence that anyone's pointed out to me that would indicate he's done anything inappropriate.
And many of the other names as well, but they still
that's right.
You know, I'm sure we'll talk more about this because, as you say, it's the gift that just keeps giving, doesn't it? And I'm sure there's more to come out. Joseph, thank you so much for your time. Joseph Kotrie-Monson.